Welcome back. You're watching Showdown. I'm joined by Labor's Ed Husick. Thanks for your company.
G'day.
Paul Fletcher from the Liberal Party. I'm sure you're glad to be here.
Good evening.
And Dr Greg O'Mahony. Thanks for your company again, as always.
Good to be here, Pat.
Greg, were you in raptures with Alan Jones's unreserved apology?
No, I didn't think it was unreserved. And you just had a pretty heated debate on it. But I thought it was the apology of someone who either didn't feel sorry or couldn't say it. I'm talking about the article yesterday, which was his best chance, I think, to say sorry. And it was 40 or 50 paragraphs, including 4 very small paragraphs of a very qualified expression of regret, followed by an attempt to paint himself as the victim, followed by some bizarre explanations. There was alcohol served at the function. I'd only heard the phrase that morning, 1 or 2 other things. And then he launched into a pretty savage attack on the Prime Minister and her policies. I'd agree that it certainly wasn't what you could describe as an unreserved apology.
Paul Fletcher, there's some Conservatives, and I don't exactly put you on that wing of the Liberal Party, but there are some Conservatives that think that this is over the top to be spending so much time talking about Alan Jones. Bit of an irony, really, given just how many hours of the week he devotes to being over the top about whatever issue he chooses to, hours on end on his show, isn't it?
Well, Peter, what's happened here is that Alan Jones has said something, as Tony Abbott has described, that was wrong, unacceptable and offensive. And then, in response to that, what the Labor Party has sought to do is spend the last 2 days trying to divert the media cycle to a continuing debate on this issue.
And I do want to get to that in a moment.
Can I just make one thing absolutely clear? I just want to remind you and your viewers what it is that Tony Abbott said in the Parliament. He said...
He was very gracious in the Parliament, absolutely.
The place good parents have in the hearts of their children, and the Coalition continues to extend its deepest sympathies to the Prime Minister. So that is Tony Abbott's position, that is the Liberal Party's position. I might say he also went on to say it is a remarkable parent who produces a Prime Minister of this country.
Absolutely.
And can I just note that Tony Abbott's parents are my constituents, and they are remarkable parents, and they will be producing a Prime Minister of this country.
You should hear what they say about you as their local member. They're huge fans.
But that makes it all the more repugnant than what Jones said, correct?
Look, clearly what Alan Jones said, as Tony Abbott has said, as Malcolm Turnbull has said, as a whole range of Coalition spokesmen have said, and I'm happy to add my voice to that, what Alan Jones said was wrong, unacceptable and offensive. But can I say, Peter, I think you are really falling into the Labor Party's media manipulation now. They've spent a couple of days really seeking to move this debate on trying to link this with Tony Abbott, and what most people are concerned about is the management of this country, the fact that we've had interest rates drop now by the Reserve Bank in recognition of the fact that growth is not going ahead.
We're going to get to all of that. We are going to get to interest rates and superannuation issues a bit later in the program. But just let me ask this, because Michael Kroger seemed to be so enraptured with this non-apology apology that Alan Jones delivered. Did you think it was an unequivocal apology?
Well, look, Alan Jones has delivered an apology.
Did you think it was an unequivocal apology?
That's a matter for him. Look, I didn't spend my time watching the apology, but if somebody says they're apologising, then I think it's incumbent on all of us to accept that. The important thing here is about civility in public debate and trying to maintain a standard of civility. If you make an apology, what you're essentially indicating is that you recognise that you've transgressed the standards of civility, and that's been done. What is important is that we do seek to maintain, to the maximum extent possible, civility in the public debate, in the way we treat each other, and that we focus on the issues. And frankly, as politicians, that is what we should be focused on. Because we are here either in the case of Ed and his party as the government of the country, or in the case of the Coalition as the alternative government of the country. And I think what the Australian people want us to be focused on is the issues of the day, their future, their prospects, and not engaged in what is essentially an internal media debate about the particular conduct of one media figure.
Ed Husick?
Look, a number of areas. I couldn't agree more with Paul on this issue about civility. I think there's something, and I want to come back to this point because I think there's a broader issue at play here that this falls within that context. But there's a very deep reaction along the lines of what was expressed earlier by yourself and others. That is, if you put yourself in the place of someone who's lost a parent, I mean, that's one of the... I haven't lost a parent, and I don't want to imagine what it's going to be like that day when it happens, but I wouldn't want that to be part and parcel of political debate in that way. I just think this is coming back to the point about civility. I think there is something in our political debate where we feel that more and more we can push the boundaries, we can push the edge of the debate to extremes that, in the States they've had to confront. I was there at the time when Gabby Giffords was shot in that awful incident. One of the things that came out afterwards was the notion that the Tea Party was putting these crosshairs on all these Democrat Congress people and targeting them and using quite emotive language in that way. And I think that the concern is, and the reason why it's come back in terms of the discussion on Tony Abbott, is because it's been part of this very hot political environment for the last 12 months. The type of rallies you've seen, the type of talk that's been on.
Yeah, but you guys are both cool trying to link this to Abbott. I mean, it's a bit silly, isn't it, calling for him to apologise for what Jones did? I mean, that's the equivalent of me demanding that Paul here apologise for what Jones did, or even that Michael Kroger apologise for what Jones did. I mean, no one expects that. My gripe here is with Alan Jones, and with the fact that his apology, in my view, is worthless. He apologised for the chaff bag comment, and then, sure enough, once enough time had passed, then signed a jacket sewn together with chaff bags and then purchased it himself at the auction. That's how much his apology means, generally. He says it, but it's garbage, or it certainly was in that case.
Well, I just think, any apology delivered through gritted teeth never seems to have the impact that it should. I take on board what Paul was saying about, you'd made the point that, he's apologised and that should be taken into account. And I'm sure there's an element of that. But from my perspective, it almost seemed like the apology was more afterthought. I mean, why... in public life,
a lot of us have been if he hadn't been recorded, he wouldn't have done it.
A lot of us in some shape or form know that the type of comments that we have do get picked up. It's open. I don't believe that there's any of this, the Chatham House rules that exist. If you say something, well, ask Mitt Romney, what he thinks about private comments. I think you've got to be conscious at any point of what your comments are like, and they have to be a reflector of what you think. And I just think, being in that situation, you mentioned the chaff bag and the jacket and the prize and the like. I just think, wouldn't you know that at that point those type of comments have drawn such a bad reaction because people don't
he'd apologise for the chaff. He'd apologise for the chaff bag, and then he did that.
I think there's another point here, Peter. Politicians have a responsibility in our collective behaviour to contribute towards the tone of the debate and to hopefully, through the way we behave, demonstrate some leadership. Now, unfortunately, and I don't want to be partisan about this, but I really am not sure we're living up to that standard if we see an episode like this being effectively sought to be manipulated for political purposes.
So I think there's been some of that by the Labor Party, I really do.
I think there really is a responsibility on all of us. And
can I ask, though, Paul, in that context, are you comfortable with the level of debate, public debate in Australia at the moment? Do you think it is overly personal? Do you think there is a context at play that's something to be ashamed of?
I think that we can always seek to improve our standards. But can I just say, I was really proud to be sitting in the Parliament when Tony said the things he did say about the Prime Minister's loss, because I thought he expressed so beautifully what all of us feel about the basic emotion there when he said, we all know the place good parents have in the hearts of their children. I thought he really beautifully expressed a sentiment which any parent and any child can understand.
Which only highlights how much more disgraceful Jones is compared to the person that he sees himself as a mentor to, which is the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, I just think the important thing is the tone that Tony Abbott set in his comments there, and that really, I think, does remind us of what is at stake here, the importance of conducting yourself as a political leader with dignity. I think Tony does a very good job of that, and he sets a good standard for all of us.
We're going to come back from the commercial break and talk about wider political issues, but just before then, one thing that I think is fascinating about this, and I've seen this over the last few days because I've been very vocal on Twitter. I wrote a column straight away about it. I made an editorial on the Sunday show Australian Agenda about my thoughts on Alan Jones. And what has been so instructive, and we saw it again tonight with Michael Kroger trying to argue that I was jealous of Alan Jones. I mean, as much as I'd love to be getting up at 4:30am every morning to do morning radio, I'm not quite sure that that's quite my shtick. The reality is that those That is what happens, and has happened for so many decades in this country. When you try to take on Alan Jones, you get shouted down, you get attacked, it gets personally vicious against you, not just by Jones, but quite frankly by his supporters. And there is this effort to, in a sense, demonise you because you are prepared to take the guy on. Well, I'm really at a point with this guy after what he did in the last couple of days where enough is enough. He is a law unto himself. If that's an unreserved apology, then that is an absolute joke.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Michael Kroger talked at length about his charity work, and I heard Graham Richardson say the same thing last night. And I think I'd be interested to know Paul's thoughts on this. But, I mean, I think that the highest calling of public life is to turn your opportunities and your talents to the benefit of the disadvantaged. And the little snippets I've heard of the Alan Jones show, he does the opposite to that. I mean, if you listen to the subject of his rants, they're Indigenous peoples, they're people addicted to heroin, they're asylum seekers. They're the most marginalised people in the community, and not only is he attacking them, he seems to be trying to mobilise a swathe of the community.
And then his mainstream listener for a long period there was getting having the wool pulled over their eyes about cash for comment when he was spruiking things like banks at the same time as not actually acknowledging that he was getting paid to do so.
Well, I care less about that, frankly, but I think his stick and the targets that he identifies, I just think it's a pretty dark art. And Paul, do you listen to his show? Would you agree with that?
Well, look, I certainly do listen to Alan from time to time. Peter, I want to be clear. You've chosen to mount a particular argument this evening. That's a matter for you.
In fairness to both you and Ed Husick, I should say that you guys were locked in to come on this show before Alan Jones's remarks ever went public, so you're not party to the topic matter as person.
I'm still looking for my rabbit's foot.
I do just want to say two things. Firstly, again, he has what he said was wrong, as coalition spokesmen from Tony Abbott down have said, but he has apologised.
Let's just hope this time, unlike the last time he apologised about the chaff bag, that he doesn't partake in some sort of sewn-together jacket with the word shame on it, for example.
The second thing...
Because history tells us that's what he'll do.
Just the second thing I'd like to say, one recent observation of mine is of Alan coming to a charity function in my electorate, 9 o'clock at night, when he had to get up early the next day. The people who organised that function were very grateful that he was there, and that's simply an observation I can make.
That's the paradox of him, though. I mean, that's what you're really saying here, without being prepared to quite put it that way, is that that's the paradox of the man, is that he does all these things...
Again, Peter, you're putting words in my mouth.
Well, I know that you're a politician, so like most, you've got to be careful, because if Alan Jones puts you in his sights, that's concerning. But
no. I think there's something...
That's not what Paul...
Let's get serious here. That's the reality about the way... People are scared of him. I've heard so many stories about Alan Jones using conduits to pass on indirect, not threats necessarily, but not far off.
There is a more important point here. It is really not appropriate for politicians to be sitting in judgment on any media figure. It's really not appropriate for us to be saying, expressing a particular view about the merits of any particular media figure.
I don't agree with you on that, Paul, for the simple reason that in public life, the type of words that we choose, the type of thoughts that we express and the platform that we have, we need to be very mindful of that. And if someone has crossed the line, then regardless of if they're an MP or if they're a senior figure within the media, I think we are accountable for our actions and words. So I do agree. I certainly got the point of where you were coming from. That's why I was talking up in the way I was. But I certainly have a different view on that. I think when you make those type of statements, you basically got to stand up and account for it. You've got to be held to account for it. And part of the problem was that Alan Jones wasn't prepared to say, frankly and quickly, and just make the statement. What I said was wrong. You don't have to couch it in all these qualifications. If you're wrong, you're wrong. I don't want to ever be in the... Look, and I'm happy for people to come back and judge me on this. I never want to be in the position that you have to get to that level in political debate where you target people in a way that requires vitriol to get you to the landing point.
What I'm saying is it gets very, very dangerous if you have politicians in a position of saying, oh, well, this particular person in the media is acceptable, this particular person is not. That's starting to get you, I think, into very, very dangerous territory.
But Paul, but with respect, where are people saying that this person's acceptable and this is not? I think what we're focused on here is a situation where someone's made reference to someone experiencing grief, And then
Labor is definitely trying to politicise this. You're not pretending otherwise, are you?
No, why not? Let's come to this point. Actually, let's deal with this point. I think this is a good
can I
point to
just put it
raise.
in a context for you? I think that there are elements of Labor certainly politicising it. However, the flip side to that, I suppose, is I'm sure that there is, the Labor Party is very tribal. I'm sure that there are a lot of Labor people that are pretty damn outraged on behalf of the Prime Minister in relation to what Alan Jones has done. And that's initially, at least, I think, driven a lot of anger, but I think it's now bubbled over to it being a politicising thing a little bit.
But there's a more significant pattern here, which is that what Labor frontbencher after Labor frontbencher has said today and over the last couple of days is trying to blame something that was said on Tony Abbott, demanding an apology from Tony Abbott, and it's a continuation of this pattern we've had from this government. This is the same political tactic that the Labor Party used in Queensland, where they sought to demonise Campbell Newman in a very unpalatable way. This is the Labor political machine at work, and they've jumped on an issue and sought to turn it to their political advantage. And again, I make the point, Peter, the more time you spend talking about it, the more you are essentially being responsive to that.
Good segue, because we're going to take a commercial break and we are going to move on from Alan Jones, even though his spiteful hissing will no doubt continue for a long time to come on morning radio. One final comment on it is, if you haven't read David Pemberthy's article, you can get it on The Punch, you can get it on news.com. I believe it was in the Telegraph today. It was certainly in the Herald Sun in Melbourne, where I was this morning, where they, by the way, editorialised that Alan Jones should get off the airwaves, and I couldn't agree more. But David Pemberthy's article is well worth a read as the final word on the disgrace that is Alan Jones. When we come back, we're going to take a look at interest rates and superannuation. Back in a moment.